day 509 of the Trump administration. And before we go too far, we mentioned this is a primary night in 5 states tonight. We're going to cover this in a short time, but we have results already, and they include a prominent GOP member of the House of Representatives who has apparently been turned away by voters tonight with some help from the Twitter feed of President Donald Trump. But to our lead story first. The president today has praised the leader of North Korea, and he has attacked Canada and Robert De Niro. The president is right now on board Air Force One, headed back to Washington after his summit with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. And while the president has insisted the summit was about denuclearization, his Twitter feed tonight shows he is seeing the criticism of his performance at the summit and is sensitive to it. Quote, "A year ago, the pundits and talking heads, people that couldn't do the job before, were begging for conciliation and peace. Please meet, don't go to war. Now that we meet and have a great relationship with Kim Jong-un, the same haters shout out, 'You shouldn't meet, do not meet.'" The president also remains effusive in his thanks and praise for the leader of North Korea, thanking, quote, "Chairman Kim for taking the first bold step toward a bright new future." And this, quote, "Chairman Kim has before him the opportunity to be remembered as the leader who ushered in a glorious new era of security and prosperity, as well as got along great with Kim Jong-un, who wants to see wonderful things for his country. As I said earlier today, anyone can make war, but only the most courageous can make peace." Those posts echoed the praise we heard from Trump for Kim Jong-un earlier today.
Well, he is very talented. Anybody that takes over a situation like he did at 26 years of age and is able to run it and run it tough. I don't say he was nice, or I don't say anything about it. He ran it. Very few people at that age, you can take 1 out of 10,000 probably couldn't.
How do you trust a killer like that?
George, I'm given what I'm given, okay? I mean, this is what we have, and this is where we are, and I can only tell you from my experience, and I met him, I've spoken with him, and I've met him, and this was, as you know, started very early, and it's been very intense. I think that he really wants to do a great job for North Korea. I think he wants to denuke.
Really, he's got a great personality. He's a, funny guy. He's a very smart guy. He's a great negotiator. He loves his people. Not that I'm surprised by that, but he loves his people.
His country does love him. His people, you see the fervor. They have a great fervor. Very smart, very good negotiator. Wants to do the right thing. He wants to do the right thing. Now, with all of that being said, I can't talk about, it doesn't matter. We're starting from scratch. We're starting right now.
The relationship was really good. It built. And I talked about early on in the relationship and the feeling, well, we had a very good feel right from the beginning. And we were able to get something very important done. People were saying, what's he like? He's got a very good personality. He's funny, and he's very, very smart. He's a great negotiator. And he's a very strategic kind of a guy.
In light of all those comments by Trump about Kim, effusiveness that continued in interviews that aired in primetime tonight on the president's way back, one of the president's own more dependable surrogates appearing on CNN tonight admitted, quote, "Look, I don't think President Trump knows a ton about the history of North Korea." The president and Kim Jong-un did sign a document at the end of this summit. It included a commitment to continued relations and to nuclear disarmament on the peninsula. It was short on specifics, though the president is convinced he has received assurances. Following the summit, Trump said he planned to end those annual joint military exercises with South Korea. He emphasized their cost.
We will be stopping the war games, which will save us a tremendous amount of money, unless and until we see that the future negotiation is not going along like it should. But we'll be saving a tremendous amount of money. Plus, I think it's very provocative.
The effort to win over the North Korean leader went further and featured something extraordinary, a propaganda video produced by the White House bearing the stamp of whitehouse.gov and shown to Kim Jong-un on an iPad. Narrated in the spirit of a movie trailer, the president was so proud of the product, he shared it with the press corps.
History is always evolving, and there comes a time when only a few are called upon to make a difference. But the question is, what difference will the few make? Destiny Pictures presents a story of opportunity, a new story, a new beginning, one of peace, two men, two leaders, one destiny. There can only be two results. One of moving back, or one of moving forward.
Again, so they're in the meeting with Kim. They hand him an iPad with this video on it, translated. Trump later gave this assessment of Kim's reaction to it.
I think he loved it. I showed it because I really want him to do something. Now, I don't think I had to show it because I really believe he wants to. I think he wants to get it done.
At the end of their time together, the president also gave Kim a tour of his armored Cadillac limousine. The two men took great pains in general to show a good relationship. There were so many handshakes, numerous pats on the back. A big change from the Rocket Man and Fire and Fury days. The rhetoric the president seems to believe helped make this summit possible.
Well, I think without the rhetoric, we wouldn't have been here. So I think the rhetoric, I hated to do it. Sometimes I felt foolish doing it, but we had no choice.
Let us bring in our leadoff panel on a Tuesday night post-summit. Robert Costa, national political reporter for The Washington Post, moderator of Washington Week on PBS. Susan Glasser, staff writer for The New Yorker and a veteran overseas journalist. And Jeff Bennett, White House correspondent for NBC News. Good evening and welcome to you all. Robert, I'd like to begin with you. What just happened? What did the U.S. get? What did the U.S. give away? And are you two noting a certain kind of sensitivity in the president's outgoing social media posts tonight?
Here on Capitol Hill, Brian, there is bewilderment in both parties. The president is so unorthodox in his approach to foreign policy that most leaders here on Capitol Hill are not really sure how to respond. Senator Bernie Sanders on the left said, well, he's encouraging of the diplomacy here, of the peace process, but still wary of how this is all playing out. Senator Marco Rubio, Florida Republican, talking about how the U.S. really can't trust Kim Jong-un. Yet at the White House tonight, they feel comfortable with the president's position. They believe that by rattling this negotiation process is the only way to have progress. And at this point, they're confident that this is moving forward incrementally, that by engaging Kim, they're bringing him into the world. But that's a risk. That's an opportunity and also a risk, depending on who you ask.
Susan, I'd like to show you back to you how you started your day on Twitter, and those who follow you woke up to the following wording. You were kind of taking in the new world. Have to admit, my head is spinning from a world where Canada is the president's enemy and rotting in hell, and North Korea is a fantastic partner. Seriously? Susan, did anything transpire during the day to change your view of the world?
Well, you know, I have to tell you, Brian, that today is one of those days that does feel a little bit like you're living inside an Onion story and you clicked on it by mistake. You know, and you did see, by the way, I should say, one of the president's advisors who had one of those astonishing attacks on the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over the weekend. He did somewhat apologize today for it. But you had President Trump himself, even in that extraordinary press conference.
He went back at Canada.
He went back at Canada. And, you know, I think what I'm struck by is, number one, of course, we've had many rounds of negotiations and talks, although never at the presidential level, between the United States and North Korea. I believe 12 previous times North Korea has committed in one way or the other to denuclearization. Over the years, there have been signed agreements that are much more rigorous than the agreement, which was really a series of 4 bullet points that President Trump announced today after the meeting with Kim Jong-un. As you said, you know, Democrats and many Republicans, of course, are supportive of peace. They're supportive of talking with North Korea rather than threatening nuclear annihilation. But to me, the last week has been a striking week for President Trump's foreign policy in that we really begin to see he has a radically different vision of the world than his predecessors, Republican and Democrat, and that includes Ronald Reagan as much as Barack Obama. President Trump has a different view of American leadership in the world. It is America as a unilateral power, and is America much more as a great power operating like Russia and China without values. He's not talking about human rights. And it's a very awkward and I think astonishing thing for many of us who've paid close attention to listen to the President of the United States lavish praise on not just a dictator, but right now, arguably, he presides over the most tyrannical country to its people in the world right now.
Jeff Bennett, the other tweet I woke up to this morning, though, in the haze of morning Twitter, the author escapes me right now. A person said on Twitter this morning, my iTunes user agreement has more specific wording in it than the document these two signed. Can you tell us what are the deliverables? What will the president haul off Air Force One as a tangible with him when he gets off the plane in the wee small hours of the morning?
Well, White House officials make the point that, yes, even though the language in this statement is vague, even though the president calls it comprehensive, although it's just a one-page document, that it does suggest that Kim and the president will work toward the eventual denuclearization of the peninsula. They say that replacing diplomacy with the specter of a nuclear showdown is a good thing. I can tell you, though, Brian, that one of the reasons why the president was spinning the smashing success of this summit before it even ended is that people close to him tell me that he was intent on emerging from these talks with some sort of victory. That had been his goal since he announced the fact that he would even accept these talks back in March. And the reason for it is really threefold. One, he thinks it's a compelling argument, a compelling pitch to make to voters in the midterm elections that he ran as a candidate who promised to upend the world order, and that he's, at least in some part, making good on that. Two, he thinks it'll help mitigate the risk he might face resulting from the Russia investigation. You know, how can you indict or impeach him, considering that all the goodwill that he's trying to bring about in the region? But he's also really intent on burnishing his legacy. You saw how he tried to cast this agreement as better than, different from anything that any other administration had tried to do. He's doing something here that no other administration could do, although you could also make the point that he's doing something that no other administration would do, and that he's meeting with a tin pot dictator, emerging at least in the short term with nothing concrete to show for it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.